So at the end of the day, you have this Constitution. By September the 15th, 1787, 4 pages, and that's all it is 4 pages. There's no Bill of Rights at that time. They'd kind of talked about it. Alexander Hamilton would say, we don't really need one. The whole thing's kind of a Bill of Rights. The government is only going to have the power we give it, so why do we even need it? Others would say, well, that's all well and good, but we'd kind of like to see something like that there. So again, even by the time they're finished, you have guys that look at parts or the whole and say, there's this I don't like, there's that I don't like this Senate because it gives way too much power to the little states, the president's too strong, he's not strong enough, we didn't deal with slavery, there's no Bill of Rights. So at the end, you come in the last day, and it's not at all certain that everybody's going to agree. Now remember, these guys are signing it to send it out for their states to vote on it. So it's important to the group as a whole to try to have everyone on board, because these are the guys that has to sell this new Constitution to the people, to that we the people, so that they will then put it into effect. So you're going to have Benjamin Franklin come in the very last day of meetings. Now Franklin is 81 that summer. There are days that he's literally being carried in and out of these meetings. He can hardly walk. But fortunately for everyone, he's still the great sage, the elder statesman. And on that last day, he brings in a speech, which he starts off by saying, there are things in this Constitution I do not approve. But then he says, at present, he says, look, I'm old enough to know I'm not perfect. My ideas aren't perfect. Nobody in this room's perfect. And we should all basically put aside our doubts and sign our names on this thing. He actually says we should all doubt a little our own infallibility, which I always love. It's another one of those typical Franklin phrases. Anyway, he says, one of his great famous statements in the room, he says, we should all sign because I do not expect anything better than this. In fact, I am not sure that this is not the best. And to me, one of the most famous triple negatives in American history. And I'm sure some of the guys in the room that were half listening are scratching their heads going, what did he just say? Did he say to sign it? Did he say not? But at the end, it's kind of hard to argue with Franklin. 42 men are there that day. Well, 41, excuse me. 41 men are in the room that day. 38 men will sign 39 names. Okay, there's a little bit of a story to that one, too. John Dickinson, who actually refused to sign the Declaration of Independence. Again, not that he was loyal to the British particularly, but that he was saying this isn't the right time, this is a bad idea, we're rushing too much, so he never signs the Declaration of Independence. He's sick the day the Constitution is going to be signed. So he tells his fellow delegate from Delaware, George Reed, look, I want you to put my name on that thing when you sign it. So George Reed signs twice, once for himself, once for John Dickinson. So 39 men would sign the Constitution. 3 would not. Different issues. You have Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, who actually made a speech that last day saying that there was an excess of democracy, which he called the worst of all political evils. The fear of democracy at that point in history is made evident a few years later in the French Revolution, when their new government went to the point of renaming months and starting over at year 1 and cutting off 6,000 heads. And that's the sort of fear of democracy, that it leads to some kind of chaotic anarchy, which ultimately in history leads to a dictator, which is exactly what France does, going up to Napoleon. And they went back to Rome and saw the same sort of things happening. So the democracy was always a little tempered here in the United States and in Britain, which is where we get our ideas of having that mix. We have a mix of states and people. We have a president and a Congress. We divide our powers. So it's this idea that there's no one place where it has too much strength coming. So Jerry's a little afraid that the democracy will overrun because he sees potential for revolution in the future. So he won't sign it. 2 of the Virginians, Edmund Randolph won't sign it, but Randolph's always one of those guys who kind of likes to hedge his bets. He ends up supporting it when Virginia's voting on it, but he wouldn't actually sign it here in this room because he's a little afraid that guys at home like Patrick Henry will, go against him, because he knows that Patrick Henry's one of those guys that doesn't think this is a great idea. And the other one, George Mason's kind of looking at that idea of a Bill of Rights, that he kind of want to see that, so he's not crazy about parts of it. And a lot of the guys from the big states like Massachusetts or Virginia, don't like that Senate. So there's all kinds of issues, but most of these men will put aside their doubts, as Franklin hoped, and sign their names. September 17th, 1787. At that point, Franklin looks at the chair where Washington sits, and he says, look behind Washington's head at this carving of a half sun on the back of the chair. And he says, all summer, I've been trying to decide whether that half sun is supposed to be rising or setting, and I could not make up my mind until now. He says, now at length, I have the happiness to know that is a rising and not a setting sun.